Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the newsroom. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. Today is the 3rd of October 2023, and these are the stories that we'll be highlighting during the course of the show. We'll begin with the full court proceedings of the Supreme Court Practice and Procedure Act that also continued today, proceedings of which were also live. The Supreme Court has now adjourned the hearing as far as the date is concerned till the 9th of October, which is going to be next Monday. Article 191 was also highlighted, which empowers the Supreme Court to make its own rules. It was said by the Chief Justice that the PTI should have argued the matter before the Parliament, so motor powers have also been misused. In the past, this was also agreed upon by the Council of the PTI. This and more are going to be discussed in our first segment, the continuation of the full court proceedings of the Supreme Court Practice and Procedure Act. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the row that is continuing between India and Canada as we speak. We've been highlighting it since the last few days, and it doesn't seem to dissipate at all as the days pass by. As far as a report from the Financial Times is concerned, India has told Canada to withdraw 41 of its diplomats. Canada also sees, of course, as has been pointed out in the past, the involvement of India's intelligence agency RAW behind the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was a Canadian national murdered in Canada. At the same time, top Indian diplomat has also been blocked from visiting the Glasgow temple. Sikh protests continue in London as well to condemn the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar as well as Mr. Khanda. The fact remains that this is creating a huge row not only on the diplomatic front but also on the religious front. Where will it all end? Only time can tell, but we are going to highlight this story as part of our second segment. Our third story concerns the successive gain of the Pakistani rupee vis-a-vis the dollar. Pakistan rupee has seen a 19 successive gain against the US dollar, has gained 0.36% in the interbank market, up by 1.4 rupees in the interbank market, and of course the local currency settled at 285.72 rupees against the US dollar. Good news, and it is continuing to pour in, and let's see what the coming days have in store for us as far as the rupee dollar parity is concerned. Then the Nobel Prize for Medicine has now gone to two scientists, one American and one Hungarian. Their work that paved the way for the COVID vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, is what has earned them this Nobel Prize in Medicine. This prize comes with about $1 million US as well to share between the winners. And of course, as per the statistics, around 1.5 billion people have received the mRNA vaccine globally, this COVID vaccine. There are different kinds of vaccines. mRNA is the different one. And of course, this is good news for those who have been researching for the future of medicine and for diseases such as COVID. And finally, we'll be talking about a mummified man who is going to receive a proper burial rather, after a period of 128 years. Stone Man Willie, as this mummified man is called, is on display in Pennsylvania. He was jailed of kidney and of course died of kidney failure in the year 1895. The funeral home has petitioned the state for permission to keep the body and also monitor the embalming process, but nevertheless, finally, after so many years, a person is going to be buried as per the procedure. These are the stories. This is our lineup for today. Let's begin with our first, and that concerns the Supreme Court Practice and Procedure law, of which the proceedings continued today. It was live again, and a lot of discussions to and fro came on, and now these proceedings have been adjourned till the 9th of October, that is coming Monday. What transpired in the Supreme Court today? We'll be back after this short report.
The impasse seems to be still there, as it was in the first hearing of the full court. The counsels of the petitioners and parties to the case keep coming back to the same point, that Parliament cannot legislate on the functions and rules of the apex court. Article 191 empowers Supreme Court to make its own rules. And that irked Chief Justice Qazi Faiz Isa, who retorted that there are photographs in this courtroom of those who validated military coups, and inquired whether the independence of judiciary repeatedly invoked during these proceedings is for the people or is it for the stand-alone principle. Justice Munib Akhtar and Justice Ejazul Ahsan questioned the Parliament's legislative competence on this matter. Justice Munib remarked that it is not about whether the law is good or bad, it is about Parliament's jurisdiction to undertake lawmaking on Supreme Court. According to Justice Ejazul Ahsan, such a change was only possible through a constitutional amendment, not by a simple act of Parliament. But Justice Muhammad Ali Mazhar was of the opinion that there is no constitutional provision which limits the Parliament's legislative powers in this regard. Presenting his arguments before the bench, PTI counsel Hassan Irfan said the Parliament can only legislate on matters mentioned in the federal legislative list. Chief Justice remarked that it would have been a lot better if PTI had argued this matter before the Parliament instead of Supreme Court. PTI counsel admitted before the bench that suo motu powers have been misused in the past, but refused to term the act as a good law. And despite being repeatedly asked, no counsel could point out any clause of the act which is in conflict with the Constitution. This is Ali Andas reporting for PTV World.
We've been joined by two guests. Our first guest is in the studios, the second is online. Our first guest in the studios, of course, no stranger to our show and others, Barrister Yasser Latif Hamdani, a legal expert who also witnessed today's proceedings in the Supreme Court. Thank you very much, Yasser, to have joined us. Our second guest, of course, is online, and he is none other than Agha Iqrar Haroon. He's a senior analyst. Agha Saab will be, of course, joining you as and when. Let's begin with you, Barrister Yasser Latif Hamdani Saab, and you were there today. We were discussing a little bit before the show began. What was the basic environment like, and what was the atmosphere like as far as this important proceeding is concerned?
I think the atmosphere today was slightly so a lot of people who had seen what would happen if sort of the Supreme Court proceedings go live as they did the last time. This time around, people were better prepared. You could see that in sort of the discourse as well. If you think about it, the petitioner's arguments made a lot more sense now than they had last time around, in my opinion.
All right.
In my opinion. But I think the atmosphere itself, we saw less of that crosstalk between the judges through the council. But that was something that they were doing last time around. But there were arguments, there were sort of riposts from one judge to another in terms of that. But the proceedings themselves were conducted, in my opinion, they were certainly of a higher intellectual level, if one could use those words, than what we've seen previously.
All right. Well, then it's good. What, in your point of view, for the layman who don't understand things as they are, what are the key provisions and implications of this Supreme Court Practice and Procedure Act 2023, particularly when it concerns the powers of the Chief Justice of Pakistan?
So basically, and this is an issue that has confronted almost every apex court in the world. The question is, what power does the Chief Justice have in terms of constituting benches, and in our case, taking the suo motu notice, and which benches to assign to whatever, so that's constitution of benches itself. In this particular law, what the Parliament tried to do was to divide that power up into a committee of 3 judges.
All right.
And 3 senior most judges. And so it's kind of, so it's structuring discretion in, which was previously just centered in the personality of the Chief Justice, whoever it was, and now is more sort of, it's democratizing it and making it 3 judges instead of. The question really, which most of the petitioners, I think a lot of the petitioners themselves believe that this is not a bad thing necessarily. If the discretion gets structured, that's a good thing. If it gets democratized, it's a good thing. However, the issue that the petitioners have is the question of parliamentary competence, whether or not the Parliament was competent to actually make a law that could regulate the procedure and practice of the Supreme Court, Supreme Court's procedure and practice. And that question really hits at Article 191 of the Constitution, which says, subject to Constitution and law, Supreme Court shall make its rules. And so it empowers the Supreme Court to make its own rules, to regulate its own procedure and practice, subject to Constitution and law.
All right.
The question that is under debate right now, or which is what has been discussed at length, is whether or not this idea of a law, could this be an act of Parliament, and if that act of Parliament can the Parliament then legislate on something that the Supreme Court has already made rules for. So Supreme Court in 1980, for those of your viewers who don't know, Supreme Court in 1980 had made the Supreme Court rules, and those are the rules that govern procedure, and that was done by a full bench of the Supreme Court in 1980. Now there's this issue of there's this doctrine called the doctrine of occupied field. Once if two competent authorities could legislate, then one of them could, if one of them has exercised its right to legislate or make rules, whatever you want to call it, and in that case the field has been occupied by them, and therefore the other competent authority cannot do it. So that's the other argument. Now one of the counsel of the Council for PTI, I believe, argued that the Parliament does have the capacity. It's just that that has to be done in a certain way, going into sort of the nitty-gritty of things.
Okay.
Because and also in certain cases, another issue that has come up with this law is the provision of appeal under 184(3). So by a statute, and that is by this particular law, the Parliament has provided the right of appeal against a case that has been taken under the special jurisdiction or the extraordinary jurisdiction that is with the Supreme Court, called 184 subsection 3, where matters of public importance as they relate to fundamental rights can be taken up by the Supreme Court. Now previously or so far there hasn't been till now an appeal against such orders or such judgments that come out of this particular provision. What we see now is that if this appeal is provided, obviously that opens up the question of what about the cases that were closed previously. I think the right of appeal would then become available to a lot of people who were previously who were aggrieved of certain orders by the Supreme Court. So that's another thing that the Supreme Court has to look at, whether this is something specific to certain people who want sort of, and that is obviously a concern. But I think overall, if you think about it, the idea of having an appeal is a good thing. Because
of course,
184 subsection 3, the proceedings start in the Supreme Court. Obviously, if a larger bench of the Supreme Court was to then decide an appeal on it, that would be even better. And I think that's something that even the petitioners accept. But they say that it should be done through a constitutional amendment and not through a simple act of Parliament.
Wonderful. I mean, these are very interesting developments that you've talked about. Agha, Iqrar, Haroon, who joins us online, tell us what, in your point of view, is the government's position as far as the regulation of the practice and procedure by Parliament and its implications for independence of judiciary and the autonomy of the judges is concerned from the executive of the country.
Thank you so much. First of all, if I'm not wrong, 184(3) is not in the same country. I mean, it is not as same as it was in the original Constitution of Pakistan 1973, which had been changed many times by the dictators, and such things were added into that. The 80s era was the most darkest era of a Pakistani Constitution. Whatever they deemed fit, they enter into that. So we should take this thing in our mind. And secondly, it is a matter of who is the supreme. It is a matter of the supremacy. Is the Parliament is the supreme, or is the Supreme Court the supreme? This is basically a major question which you can say behind the connotation or denotation of all this debate we are listening today. Actually, I believe the Constitution made the Parliament supreme, but that Constitution was compromised several times in 80s and even thereafter. No, today we don't know who is the supreme. Whenever Supreme Court requires and needs and wishes to, it simply strike down the laws, the acts. They are made by the Parliament, the same Parliament who made this. Provided the powers to Supreme Court to act and to work within, you can say, within the state. So these are the questions. This is. I'm talking about at the academic level. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. But if I give my opinion is a basically academic opinion, an opinion which has a philosophical aspects of that. So this is a very important thing. And secondly, why Supreme Court is not ready to share its own power with 3 judges instead of 1? This is another question. Why it is only the Chief Justice who has this right? And
All
secondly, if a Chief Justice was or is against anybody, and he did, or gave some, you can say, decisions about someone, so he had no other forum to be readdressed. Because according to this existing law, the same bench would say, be constituted for the appeal. So we have seen the misuse of, judicial powers during the last at least 10 years. Even the court understands today, and court is giving, you can say, observations what the Supreme Court has been doing with the law. Today, the Chief Justice mentioned that this Supreme Court has abrogated and ruined the Constitution many times. So this is not a simple discussion. Yes, it looks like only 183(4) and only the power of 1 judge or 3 judges or blah, blah, blah. But the things are more deep. And I think this is, I am so glad that in my life I have seen this openness in the Supreme Court, that I can listen and everybody can listen what is going on inside the Supreme Court about the Constitution petition. Look,
all right, that's of course an interesting perspective from your end. Coming back to you, Yasser, do you feel that necessary provisions need to be made as per the reservations that have been highlighted by Agha, Iqrar, Haroon Saab? Do you feel that these reservations are actually present, or is it just an implication of the current procedures law that is being discussed in the Supreme Court?
No, I think what Agha Saab was saying makes a lot of sense. What he's talking about in the question of parliamentary sovereignty or parliamentary supremacy is a very important one, because that is the question: what kind of democracy are we? Are we a parliamentary democracy? If we are a parliamentary democracy, then the parliament has the right to, and that is sort of, if you listen to what the Chief Justice has been saying, and judges like Justice Arthur Manila and Sayyid Mansoor Ali Shah have been saying, they seem to favor the idea that Parliament should be supreme and the Parliament has the power to legislate on this issue. And remember, and this is just purely my opinion, or at least one of the sides of the tangle, as it were, is that the Parliament, which is what decides, it is the Parliament that decides how many judges there are going to be in the Supreme Court. So surely the Parliament can also legislate on whether or not the procedure can be tweaked with or not. That is something that, so I believe in terms of the basic fundamental question, I think that is going to be resolved, because you see, Pakistan says very clearly, Pakistan's constitution says it's in its preamble, that it shall be ruled by, or it shall be governed by, or the sovereignty shall be delegated to representatives of the people, elected representatives of the people. That means parliamentary sovereignty, parliamentary supremacy. And I think that question is something that many of the judges on the bench right now seem to be answering yes. If the Parliament, because one of the questions that the Chief Justice asked today to one of the council, he said, if we do it, that's all right, unelected 15 judges do it or 17 judges do it, that's all right, but if the Parliament, which represents 240 million people, does it, why isn't it all right? Why is the Parliament such a no-no? So I think that itself indicates, and I feel that the bench is definitely looking towards
a balance of power.
A balance of power, a sort of but balance of power in the sense that yes, there is the trichotomy and there is the question of separation of powers which the petitioners are urging. However, the fact of the matter is that in a parliamentary democracy, and Pakistan is a Westminster parliamentary democracy. The parliament is the one that makes the constitution. The parliament is the one that legislates. Therefore, the parliament is supreme. Now, the alternative to this theory that is in vogue in Pakistan is that the constitution is supreme. But I don't agree with that. I don't think that's because it's the constitution, since it's been drafted by the parliament, and it is the parliament that adds the salient added the salient features to the constitution as well. Therefore, it's not the constitution, but it is the parliament that is supreme. So I think that is the nub of the matter. If this gets decided, I think it would be interesting times and for our future generations, in terms of when the posterity will look back and see this particular case. This will be one of those landmark cases in our history.
All right. Iqrar, Haroon, I'd like to understand two things. The first is, you talked about the live streaming of the event, and you said it gave an opportunity to you, amongst other laymen and citizens of Pakistan and others as well, to understand how the proceedings go in the Supreme Court. How important is it, A, as far as the transparency in the judicial system is concerned? B, the second part of the question concerns the suspension of this enforcement of the Supreme Court Practice and Procedure Act 2023 that happened on the 13th of April. How do you see that? What, in your point of view, what were the circumstances that led to the suspension at that time?
First of all, I am very happy, and I mentioned I am so fortunate that in my lifetime I have seen this live streaming of what is going on inside Supreme Court on constitutional petitions. I mean, it is a very great opportunity to everybody sitting in their homes. We should know who they are. We should know, not only the bench, rather the bar. Both, their performance is being observed by everybody. I am very happy about that. Although I think it takes, you can say, so much time for television screens to give a live streaming, but it is very important, very, very important. And secondly, what circumstances you have asked me for this?
About the suspension of this act that happened on the 13th of April, what were the reasons in your point of view?
Yes, I'm coming to that. Because politicians were watching everything carefully, and many politicians had been barred from politics because of certain decisions of the Supreme Court, and they want to come back again in the main political stream, and they wanted to get rid of this gloss. This is the political side. But if you, again, I'm saying, if you talk about the academic side, so Omar, let me add, this is, we are a country who had been run by a CEO like a corporate sector. This Supreme Court made a person chief executive officer of the country for many, many months. And this was against any rule of the Constitution and even any rule on earth. No country had ever been run by a CEO, and it was all done by the Supreme Court. So basically, the credibility of Supreme Court for the last, I'm not saying for the last 60 years or 6 decades, at least I can say for the last 2 decades, you can say credibility of the Supreme Court is also at stake. And again, after standing in front of this decision of the Parliament or the Act of the Parliament, again this, you can say, compromise the credibility of the Supreme Court, and we must appreciate the sitting Chief Justice. He is very open. So he is basically not only fixing everybody, laws and the supremacy of the Constitution, but he is also trying to, you can say, create a harmony or develop, you can say, confidence of people on Supreme Court. That Supreme Court is not only a place from where the only, you can say, I don't want to use enough dictatorial, but anti-parliamentarian observations and laws can come. This is a Supreme Court who had been tagging some politicians as mafias. What is that? Who had given this power to Supreme Court judges in past to tag anybody, any politician who is, backed by millions of votes, just say mafia because that judge wanted to say about mafia. So this is basically the background of what is going on today. This is not a matter of only the parliament. This is not a matter of the constitution. This is a matter of the respect and honor of the Supreme Court also, and the credibility of the Supreme Court also, and this deficit of confidence and trust which has been developed among masses. I'm not using the word against, but about the Supreme Court of Pakistan.
All right. Thank you so very much, Agha, Iqrar, Haroon Saab, to have joined us and to have talked to us about your perception of this act that is currently under discussion in the Supreme Court as we speak. Finally, Yasser, I'd like to understand the broader implications that this act might have, whichever decision comes the way of the Supreme Court, as far as the functioning and the procedures of the Supreme Court of Pakistan are concerned.
I think what we've been talking about earlier as well, and what Agha Saab was saying, it kind of builds on that. What you would have is a more democratic Supreme Court if this law was to go through. However, the caveat is that you would also have the influence of the legislature on the judiciary. So that's a question that the Supreme Court has to look at, whether this actually violates the separation of powers principle or not. And that, I think, going forward is something that we would find out in the judgment, how that's squared.
All right. Thank you so very much, Barrister Saab, to have joined us. Barrister Yasser Latif Hamdani, legal expert, talking to us about the proceedings of the Supreme Court Practice and Procedure Act that went on live today as well. And of course, it has been further, it will continue further on the Monday, the 9th, if I'm not wrong. Yes. Thank you very much to have joined us. Let's come to our second story, and that concerns the tensions between India and Canada. And this rift is deepening in the wake of the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And the fact also remains that, as reported by the Financial Times, there is going to be an exodus of many diplomats from India, Canadian diplomats from India. But this is again for Financial Times report. To talk about that, we've been joined by Mahrukh, who's an expert in international relations. Mahrukh, thank you very much to have joined us. Looking at the tangent of relations between India and Canada as we speak, how much do you feel it has deteriorated since the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar?
Assalamu alaikum, Omar. Thank you for having me. I think it has quite significantly deteriorated. I believe nobody was expecting it to go, significantly down like the way it did, but it has put a lot of pressure on India. However, we see the kind of pressure being put up by Canada, on India. That's something very new that we have seen from the Western country, altogether. A country who's also a NATO ally. What is important now is that how this will unfold in the future. It's a relatively recent story that the way the Canadian Prime Minister, how he came up with India, calling India in particular, and the act that they did as a state-sponsored, thing. Now the important thing is we need to see how the story unfolds in the future.
All right. Now, as far as the unfolding of the story is concerned, we've had the allegations from Justin Trudeau, we've had them from Melanie Joly, who is the Foreign Minister of Canada, and of course the fact that there is an exchange of, not an exchange, but ouster of diplomats. In the first phase, we saw that Canada ousted one of the Indian diplomats. It was followed tit by tat by India, and now the Financial Times reports around 41 Canadian diplomats that have been told to leave India. What broader repercussions do you feel this could have on the region as well, looking at the fact that Canada is also very close allies with the US, so is India? Is it going to create a rift between the relations between India and the US in the long run?
I think certainly it will. Canada is not just a close ally of the US, it's also a NATO ally. It's one of the founding members of NATO. We also need to consider that Canada has its own standing, and it's not every day that you hear a prime minister of a country coming at its parliament and telling another country of accusing another country of such an act. So I think India is going to be under a lot of pressure, but the pressure would be more on bilateral terms, closed door, nothing in public or nothing in the sense that would come out on TV or such like that.
All right, Mahrukh, how do you see the reaction that has come from the Indian government or the Indian diplomats regarding this row, whether it be the treatment of Indian diplomats in Canada or the demand for removal of around 40 Canadian diplomats from the country?
Honestly, I think India, Pakistan has been for so long, telling this to the world that India is, or the state machinery of India is responsible for a lot of unjudicial killing, especially in Kashmir. This has come out as, kind of a surprise for the world, and we see India, honestly, I don't see much change in the Indian narrative, so to say. The kind of treatment that Justin Trudeau got at the G20 summit and all of those things, I don't think India is actually bothered by it. However, the pressure may come when it comes from the US. We might see change in the Indian behavior towards this whole episode.
All right, but Mahrukh, I'd like to also understand, I did talk about the US and its ties with India that could be affected in the long run. You were in accordance with my point of view, but how do you see the response by the Biden administration as far as this row is concerned and the murder of Mr. Niger?
I think they are being a bit cautious at the moment, keeping in mind the kind of relations they have with India, because they do need India for their own foreign policy to go beyond. So we might see sort of a rift, but nothing in particular that is going to be very significant as far as we are talking about US-India relations.
Of course, I understand that. But what if, we know that both the US and Canada are part of the Five Eyes, in that there's an intelligence sharing mechanism that they have as far as important events are concerned. And herein, as well as far as the reports go, there has been an intelligence sharing as far as what the facts, figures and, proofs behind the murder of Mr. Niger are concerned. What if the implication regarding India comes to be true through the different proofs that have been submitted? What then?
The point important to note down is that the implications will be significant. However, the accusations are true. No, like I said, no state head would come on a public forum and declare a certain country as being involved in an act like that. And I believe not just with the US, Canada has also shared this information or the kind of evidence that they have with the British, parliaments and the British head of a country. They have also involved the British intelligence agencies, with their own procedures that they have. So, like I said, I think we would get a clearer picture, the kind of international pressures from the West, the US, the UK, that will come on India. In let's say another month or two, we'll see a clearer picture then.
All right. Mahrukh, kindly stay online with us. We have to go to a short break and we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom, and we are discussing the ties and the row rather between India and Canada, and how that has been affected, the ties how they have been affected because of the murder of a Canadian national, Mr. Hardeep Singh Niger, in Canada, and supposedly, as per the reports go, by India or Indian affiliated agencies. Mahrukh Khan, who's online with us, joins us back after the break. Mahrukh, I'd like to understand, do you feel this is going to affect, this current tension is going to affect the trade or economic relations between Canada and India? Because if I remember well, even during the G20 summit, one of the trade agreements was suspended between the two countries. Do you feel such ties will be affected in the future as well?
Already, like you mentioned, seen that the trade ties between the deal that they were having, it's been paused. And I believe the kind of back and forth of this whole episode that's been going on between Canada and India, the trade, economic ties, bilateral ties, they all will nosedive to a certain extent. Might not finish, but they will nosedive till a certain extent.
All right, Mahrukh, do you feel that there are any concerns as far as the long-term consequences of this diplomatic tension between the two countries are concerned on the subcontinent or on in the global north? We all know, you talked about the the importance of Canada as far as being part of NATO is concerned. We also know about the how should I say, strong relations between India and the EU as well. Do you see in the long run a rift between different organizations like NATO, EU, and more of politicking amongst these organizations because of this row?
At a regional level, I believe that the rift between India and Canada has somehow put Pakistan's case a bit forward when Pakistan has been, repeatedly called and, accused India of extrajudicial killings in Kashmir. But, the West was pretty much blind to the whole narrative. But now that Canada has come up with this, not exactly accused, but they've come out pretty clear and loud that, India is involved in extrajudicial killing in another country. So I think this will put Pakistan case at a better pedestal in the region. Talking about on the international front, it will probably create a lot of friction in different blocs, or in the UN as well, in NATO, or not exactly, India is not part of NATO, but let's say because the US is, and between Canada and the US to an extent.
All right. Do you feel any back channel diplomacy is also going on as we speak to kind of bring back the linkages that have been torn to some extent between India and Canada because of this row?
I'm sure there has to be, but like I said, the kind of agencies that are now being involved, there are reports coming out of Canada that the British intelligence agencies, they've, given evidence to the British intelligence agency and they've asked their Prime Minister to get involved into this rift. And, the US is actively involved, however, not at the public front, but at the backdoor front. So it might take some time, but it may not go as they were, before the June incident.
All right. I understand you say that the trade ties between Canada and India might be affected or might not be affected in the long run. That only time will tell. What happens to the very strong geostrategic or geoeconomic relationship that a lot of countries that are part of the Five Eyes, enjoy with India? Is that anywhere, anytime going to be affected because of this, whatever the implication might be?
Ties will come under strain, that's for sure. The ties will come under strain, but if we are assuming there will be a cutoff, that's I think that's a little too far-fetched. We won't see a complete cutoff, but ties will come under a lot of stress because of this episode.
There have also been a lot of protests as far as the Sikh community is concerned in London. One of the Indian diplomats was also blocked from entering the Glasgow temple. Is there some kind of an increase in rift? We already know that there was a huge movement by the Sikhs as well globally, but do you feel this is going to further accentuate that movement, further going to accentuate the rift between the Sikhs and the blame that they put on the Indian government on how they have been treated in India?
I think we need to understand that when it comes to India and the issue of Sikhs, we see two parallel Sikhs, running at the Indian mentality. One Sikhs are the one in Punjab, the Indian Punjab, and then they see Sikhs that are out of India, who they usually call as, who have been, who got out of India because of fear of life and all those things. So they have that kind of, the Sikhs that have moved abroad. India, under their, own assumptions, they don't consider them Sikhs as the Sikhs that live in Punjab. They, for the larger part, they call them the Khalistanis, people involved in the Khalistan movement, which, to an extent, the kind of community that is abroad of Punjab is quite strong. So, that's kind of the thing that we need to also be very well aware of. The kind of Punjabi divide that India is instigating to get more, dominance in ground and to get more of their voice across in internationally, abroad.
You say, Mahrukh, that this whole row that has emanated now openly between two important countries, specifically between Canada and India, has kind of made Pakistan's case also stronger as far as the human rights abuses and the way India has been directly and indirectly involved in destabilizing Pakistan. Reports on which with facts and figures have been submitted to different international organizations in the recent and distant past by Pakistani authorities as well. Do you feel also this is going to gain a lot of importance on what India is doing within its country as far as its minorities are concerned?
Of course, like we have seen in the recent past and in very recently, a lot of the kind of policies that India is leading come under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Through that act, they've been targeting minorities, whether they're Muslim, Christians, Sikhs that they fear from, or they categorize as terrorists. So there's an active, this whole state, the Indian state, quite active. They've given a political license to go after minorities to meet their own needs. put forth their own policies at the domestic level. And we also need to realize, or we also need to consider this fact, that post this incident and the kind of, brushing aside India has given Canada, unfortunately, the ratings, the public support ratings of Narendra Modi has significantly risen. So this also shows a kind of a political, political aspect at play at their domestic level.
All right. So a lot of tension, a lot of differences, a lot of opinions, a lot of polarization that we are seeing within India and outside of India, between India and Canada as well. And what that is all going to lead to, I think only time will tell. Thank you so very much, Mahrukh, to have joined us. That was the international affairs expert Mahrukh joining us online and talking to us about this continuity of the row between India and Canada, wherein on the one hand it exposes India for going against other countries' citizens in other countries. It also highlights what Pakistan has been saying since a long time about how India has been trying to destabilize Pakistan directly and indirectly. Let's come to our last three stories very quickly. The first concerns the rupee-dollar parity, and of course the rupee seems to be gaining ground as we speak. 19th successive gain of the Pakistani rupee against the US dollar as we speak. 0.36% in gain as far as Pakistani rupee is concerned in the interbank market. Of course, it equals to 1.04 rupees, and it is currently pitting at 285.72 rupees against the US dollar. This is of course good news as far as Pakistan's economy is concerned, because it is because of the measures that are now currently being taken that the dollar is now slowly and steadily coming to a decent parity as far as Pak rupee is concerned, and also the difference between the interbank and the open market has also decreased as per the requirement of the IMF. Then let's talk about the Nobel Prize in Medicine as far as those who have been receiving this important prize is concerned, and there are two important scientists who have received it, and they have received it for their research that they did for the mRNA vaccines that proved to be quite successful as far as the treatment or prevention against COVID-19 is concerned. Remember when COVID-19 came out and there was a lot of apprehension across the world. Of course, there are the anti-vaxxers as well and those who do not believe in these vaccines, but those who did have different doses of these vaccines, including myself. I've had the mRNA vaccines and all the different doses that were available in Pakistan, and that not only provides a certain protection against the COVID-19, but it was also very important for everybody to get vaccinated so that they do not get the disease to the virulence that it could from others, and also not pass it on. If they did have it, the virulence would be much less. The prize money that these two scientists are now sharing is going to be around $1 million US. Both these scientists are Katalin Kariko, he's a professor at Sagan's University in Hungary, and Drew Welsman of the US. These are the two scientists who have won the US Nobel Prize for Medicine. Congratulations to the both of them. And then finally, let's come to our last story, and that is the mystery concerning a mummy. Not the mummy as we call our mother, but actually mummified, the mummy that we can see in the parallel window right here. For 128 years, the mummified remains of a man known as Stone Man Willie have been on display at the funeral home in Reading in Pennsylvania in the United States of America. He was once a petty thief apparently who died in jail and was accidentally mummified and is now set to receive a proper burial after 128 years. This seems to be quite a record, because he was not an Egyptian pharaoh. He was just a petty thief who accidentally got mummified. But of course his mummy remained an object of interest as far as this funeral home in Reading, Pennsylvania is concerned. And now that the decision has been taken to finally give him a proper burial, is going to lead to a lot of more people coming in looking at the mummified remains of this person for a very last time before he is finally laid to rest. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new story segments that pertain to us, you in Pakistan. Stay safe. We have a lot of conjunctivitis across Punjab. The only way is to be safe, wash your hands, and of course keep a certain distance from those who do have it. Allah Hafiz.